2, 1.
Hallo, hallo, hallo. Oi. Er alle klare? Kan dere finne plassene deres? Okay, are we ready? Is the live stream ready? Then let's go. Dear everyone here at Jungs, and dear all of you following the live stream, it's such a pleasure to say welcome back to the second game audio conference in Oslo. So last year was just the beginning, and GACO 2022 is already GACO on steroids compared to last year. We have 3 hours more each day, and that means the program is a total of 6 hours longer, including the first ever GACO Awards, which will take place tomorrow. So I'm Sarah, and I'm super happy and honored to be here again as your host through these 2 days, packed with inspiration, learning, and connecting. Thanks so much for joining us. So we are going to meet magnificent speakers from all over the world to cover a wide array of topics under the overall theme of GACO 2022, which is future. They will share their knowledge and advice, as well as their best tools for the future and for you to build your best and most sustainable future within the challenging game industry. And hopefully, we'll all leave this conference with some new perspectives and ideas and new connections. Before we kick it off with our first speaker, a huge thanks to all our partners, our co-presenters, NFI and Soundly, our sponsors, Raw Fury, Viken Filmcenter, Elias, and Keorika Eyeball, and all our supporters, Funcom, Sony Music, Virke, Hyper Games, D-Pad Studio, Krillbite Studio, Nonida, Snowcastle Games, NOPA, Norsk Komponistforening, Megapop, Mediasound Hamburg, and SSSMG. So it's not only the program which is longer, but also the list of partners, so thank you. Make sure you use the breaks between each talk well. Visit the toilets, are in the back there. Fill up your cups, talk to someone, meditate, get some fresh air. Just don't use the emergency exit, which is there. And at 12:40, it will be a long lunch break. So, are you ready to start the deep dive? There's one word that appears in today's first talk that I think describes the Norwegian game audio industry well, and that word is altruism. Altruism is the unselfish concern for other people. It's about sharing without expecting something in return. And I've met some of the most altruistic people I know here, because altruism also describes networking on a higher level. And our first speaker will touch upon that. He ran an orchestra in Boston for 5 years. He's also running the game outfit Lee and Ortega, where he, in his own words, writes music for whatever the hell you want. In his talk, Short-Term Altruism, Long-Term Self-Interest, he will talk about how to succeed in networking and hack your own brain with rewards and dopamine, among other necessary tasks to build a successful career. His own interest for the topic started because networking and socializing didn't come very natural to him. So he worked hard to uncover the hidden mechanisms behind social behavior using a very mechanical approach. And now he wants to share those mechanisms that he discovered, and hopefully, if you follow the recipe that has worked well for him, he can help you save 1 or 2 years of networking to get to the same place. So, with us today on live stream from Singapore, please give a warm welcome to Xiao An Li.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to assume that you can hear me. I'd like to talk today about altruism. Now, altruism is a very interesting topic because, most people think of it as sort of, it's something where you don't actually think of the benefit to yourself. But the thing is, evolutionarily speaking, altruism has been a positive trait, especially for creatures like ourselves that live in small communities, because it's very understood. You help your neighbor, one day they might help you back. The problem is that as we've moved into larger societies, this effect becomes very diluted, and people tend to find it easier to focus on short-term reward. And that's something that we're wired for. We're not really wired for the long term. We're wired in a way that, we seek out or we perform behaviors that are most likely to give us the greatest amount of reward the most quickly. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to explore a little bit about what kind of creatures we are. Okay, and the reason for this is that it's very important to understand sort of the underlying mechanisms that motivate our behavior in order to understand the behavior. If you're a musician, you know that, for example, if you want to make beautiful music, you need to learn a lot of nitty-gritty and mechanistic things that underlie that so that you can create something that to someone else might seem like sort of like the general broad idea, but there is a lot of stuff going underneath. And I think that this is what happens with a lot of social behavior. So we'll talk about that. The most important thing here is that we are built for the short term, And the problem with that is that if we seek short-term reward in networking, there is very little short-term reward. In exercise, there is very little short-term reward. In practice, there's very little short-term reward. The problem is that we cognitively know that these activities are necessary for us to improve ourselves and to improve our health, our career, whatever. The problem is that if we want to do these activities with any level of consistency that will allow us to gain the long-term benefits, we need to be able to do them consistently over a long period of time. And it's very difficult to do that. I have personally let many gym memberships lapse, just because I can't bring myself to go back to the gym, because it's such an awful experience for me anyway, right? That even though I want to get healthy and even though I want to be disciplined, right, I can't do it. So we're built for short-term reward. Now, animals are very similar in the sense that, if you wanted to perform a behavior, you're going to have to give it a treat in general. So for a dog, for many cats, for sea lions or whatever, right? If you give them something that they're motivated by, right, and help them to bridge the gap between the action you want from them and the reward, then you are going to be able to get them to perform that reward consistently because they create that sort of association. There's a lot of text on this slide, and I'm not going to read all of it necessarily, but I'm going to leave it there, and I'll send out the PDF, and just if you guys want to take a closer look at it, and feel free. So human beings are very similar. We want to know that there is a reward waiting once we perform the behavior. We can't tell an animal, for example, to go and study for an exam because it's like, I want the reward now. And human beings, we are largely subconscious creatures, and we need to be able to that subconscious, that lizard brain part of us, right, wants the reward immediately. And so there are a couple of things that have shown this. For example, there is a very controversial the marshmallow experiment, right? So I will preface this by saying that they did not control for socioeconomic status among the children. So basically, the results were very skewed for a long time in a way that sort of showed it sort of served to perpetrate the narrative that poor people are poor because they had poor self-control, but that's not the case. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the experiment. For those of you who don't know it, is that there were a number of children who were shown a marshmallow. They put a marshmallow on a plate in front of them and told them that if they didn't take the marshmallow, they might get another one later. And they found that some children took the marshmallow anyway, and some children were able to wait. And later on, they found out that the ones that were able to delay gratification would perform better in life. Now, the problem is that, of course, some of these children were poorer and some were richer. And so the richer ones had sort of the security to be able to wait, whereas the poorer ones, they might not get another marshmallow at any other time. And so they decided to just take what they could at that moment. So very much thinking the short term. And now, socioeconomic factors are not the only thing that will contribute to us being more short-term thinkers or more long-term thinkers. But basically, there are a lot of things in our lives that will motivate us to seek short-term reward more than long-term reward. So this is a fact of our biology. It is not a moral failing. It's not that this is the problem. This is a problem in a lot of Asian societies and sort of the Asian diaspora in English-speaking countries, immigrants, is that we think that it's a matter of just discipline. You just need to be disciplined. But discipline does not tackle the issue of why we are motivated to do things. It's sort of like it's a value judgment, right? So it is a fact of our biology that we will seek reward. And so it's not a moral failing. And so instead of trying to become fundamentally different from what we are and trying to sort of force ourselves into a particular mold that we're told is morally superior, what we need to do is understand how our internal behavioral machinery works and how we can turn that to our advantage. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm just going to tie in the altruism part here. Altruism has very long-term rewards. It is not short-term. And so in order to get to the point where you are practicing it on a consistent basis in the right way, you're going to need to engineer short-term rewards into your behavior so that you feel like doing it over and over again. If you did it just because you were afraid of being a bad person, that's not really a good motivation. So at the core of all of this is a substance known as dopamine. Everyone knows about dopamine. Everyone talks about it. Basically, it is a substance that is triggered when we do something that gives us pleasure or reinforcement, right? And so this is the key thing in habit building. If you feel good or if you are reinforced doing a particular activity, you're more likely to do it again. And so drugs, for example, is the ultimate reinforcing activity because it just blasts your brain with dopamine, right? Certain kinds of drugs. And then so you're very tempted to do it again and again. But on a sort of normal non-drug induced basis, where we should also be able to sort of set up triggers for ourselves so that we can use this particular underlying machinery to get us to repeat behaviors that would otherwise be kind of shitty. Like for example, if you wanted to go running, right? A very simple example of that is that, let's say, maybe kind of like give yourself a mental reward every time you see a particular landmark, or every time, maybe you run to the beat of the music, right? And you're concentrating on matching the beat of the music, right? You're not focusing so much on the pain, which is definitely going to happen. But as you follow the beat of the music and you are successfully doing so, right? It just kind of feels good. Kind of feels good because you set a target and you achieved it. And these are very short-term targets, right? So these are just a couple of examples. Now, networking is a very sort of I wouldn't say controversial topic, but it's something that people have a lot of emotional associations with. A lot of people really, really hate to do it. And that's because they see networking as something being necessary, but either you might be introverted, right? Or you think that it's a sleazy activity, right? And then so when you do it, it's kind of a punishing environment because it's like eating, it's like the broccoli of your professional life, right? You do it because you have to, not because you want to. And that's a surefire way of making you a really shitty networker. So let's define networking a little bit. Okay, so it's on the paper, right? We'll loosely define networking as interpersonal interactions requiring a particular combination of skills that an individual knowingly engages in any combination to gain influence and improve the likelihood of encountering long-term professional opportunities. This is what networking means to me. I don't go to a networking event expecting to make a sale, expecting to get an opportunity right there. Sometimes it's taken me like up to 7 years for a person that I've met to convert into something else, and in between there's been a lot of maintenance. So this is just further elaboration of some of those keywords. So you're just interacting with other people. You use particular skills like, understanding things about their culture, knowing how to listen, knowing how to ask the right questions, right? You gain influence, right? Because as you do this, you eventually have more people that know you, and you know more people. And as more people know you, and they start to sort of talk amongst each other about you and things you've done or what kind of person you are, that tends to build a little bit of trust just because you're familiar. And in the long term, right, this is the kind of environment that will give rise to professional opportunities, right? So I guess I don't really have to convince anyone here that it's an important activity, but it is a very, very long game. So if you go to a networking event and you seek a short-term reward, like let's make it even not even about getting work, right? Let's say you go there and you want you want people to like you, right? It's a very common human desire, but it's very difficult to prove that someone likes you. And so if you are not confident, you're more likely to believe that they don't. And then that's punishment. You punish yourself. So what happens when you punish someone for doing something is that they tend to avoid that activity. So if you punish yourself, you will avoid networking. Personally, I've for many years I punished myself not being adequate at networking in large group situations, that even today when I am in a large group, I really don't like being there. So this kind of thing, if you sort of start off on the wrong foundation, it can be very difficult to correct the anxiety that comes from that. All right, so basic explanation of being an extrovert or introvert, right? So as an introvert, you might find it a little bit more difficult to get started, but there is the advantage of, if you know that sort of you're starting at a lower place, it might motivate you, if you're competitive, it might motivate you to actually reach a networking ability that's higher than someone else who was born with perhaps a little bit more gregariousness. So let's talk about networking. Okay, we're in different levels. So everyone builds their career over a different period of time. You have a different starting place, right? When I started out networking, I didn't know, I barely knew how to have interactions with people that I'd never met before. I was a very awkward person, and the problem was that I knew I had to do it, but whenever I went to networking events, right, whenever I went to a conference or something like that, I would come back with 0 because I was unable to get past that hurdle. So very simple way to deal with that, right? And by the way, the altruism is towards the end. Because the hurdle was too high for me to surmount, I had to lower that hurdle. So I have to change the win state. So if, for example, I'm at a party, right, and I'm not very confident, what is the minimum level of thing that I can do that successfully, right? So for me, it was say hi to somebody. So if you walk up to somebody and say hi, unless they're real, butt faced, right? I mean, they'll probably say hi back, especially if it's sort of in the context of a networking event where people are supposed to go there to meet each other. And if you go there and say hi, you win, for example. Okay, and that was my low bar right in the beginning. So try to make it as easy for yourself as possible, right? It's very it's kind of like, weightlifting. It's very tempting to challenge yourself, right? And you should challenge yourself, but if you go a little bit too far, you can sometimes you can cause difficult to repair damage, right, to your psychology when it comes to networking. So gamify your experience by setting very achievable and mechanistic goals that are not subjective. You don't go away saying, oh, did they like me? Did they not like me? It's very hard to say whether you did that successfully or not, but it's very easy to say that, for example, I said hi. By the way, it's really funny because I haven't actually done a whole lot of live streamed talks. So right now, what it feels like is I'm talking to my phone. So that's very weird. So I apologize for any awkwardness. Okay. So that's for the beginner level. Just key takeaway is just make it easy for yourself, right? Set very, very achievable goals. Now, the thing about at the intermediate level of networking, then that's when you begin to have sort of more substantive conversations. One of the key things to do when you're having these conversations is to shut up, right? Because people love talking about themselves, and people love to be given an opportunity to talk about themselves as well. So if you just ask someone, "Oh, what brings you here?" Now you can practice at this at this conference if you're not confident. If you ask someone, "What brings you here?" "Oh, so have you been working on anything interesting recently?" And you just let them go on about themselves, right? Because this is something that a lot of people love to do because they love to have someone else interested in them. They love to talk about themselves. So give them an opportunity to do it. This is one of the keys to really good conversation. In a way, it is a kind of minor altruism because you're sort of sacrificing airtime, right? By letting the other person speak instead of you. But by doing that, it is more likely that as you demonstrate a small level of interest in the person from the beginning, that they are more likely to reciprocate that later in the conversation, and then you'll have an opportunity to speak. But by that time, you already have sort of set up a good rapport. They'll think you're a sparkling conversationalist simply because you didn't say anything. Okay? So another thing, another kind of sacrifice that you have to make is that if you want to talk to somebody in particular, or if you've set up a coffee with somebody, you should have a fair level of basic knowledge about what they do, about what their significant achievements are, what they're proud of. LinkedIn is a very easy place to find out this stuff, or Twitter. It depends on sort of where. It depends on what's popular with the people that you're talking to. On Twitter, for example, you might be able to find out their political views. Then you're not gonna put your foot in it. So, in terms of engineering the short-term reward mechanisms that motivate you to overcome the natural human tendency to talk about yourself, you can gamify this experience by setting sort of, again, very mechanistic goals for yourself. So if someone is talking to you, are you thinking about what to say before they're done talking? So, a lot of people like to formulate a response in their head before the other person is done, so that you have a response ready. But that very often takes away from your listening ability, and sometimes you might miss something, and people eventually find out. So if you successfully listen to somebody all the way through without thinking about what to respond and leaving it to later, then you win. Right? So not everyone is a robot like me. Okay, so I recognize that this is kind of robotic in some ways. This is I recently discovered that I have some level of autism spectrum disorder, and so this is just a self-diagnosis. So I understand that for some people this may seem like too much, too building blocky, too fundamental. But for me, it was very helpful, and I think that there are a lot of people that could use methods like this. And again, so are you asking the right kinds of questions, right? And let's make it even less difficult. Let's make it even less subjective by talking about the specific kind of questions that you want to ask. So if you know, for example, that it's better to ask open-ended questions, right, versus closed questions. Like for example, oh, did you take Singapore Airlines to come here? That's a closed-ended question because they'll say yes or no. It's open-ended if you say, oh, have you been enjoying yourself? Like, let's see, do you have plans? Like, what are your plans for the rest of the trip or something like that? That's a lot easier. So if you reward yourself mentally for asking those particular kinds of questions, you'll eventually get better at doing that, and it just comes more naturally. Now, this is the part that I was actually tempted to start with, but I realized that it's something that comes much later. If you want to sort of generate trust in the spirit of reciprocity in other people, it is really important to bring value to the conversation. Some people might differ with me here, but I believe that if you can find out what people want or what people need or they are motivated by, you can very easily give them a gift that costs you nothing. And as you get better at networking, as you get more people in your network, you begin to see sort of synergistic possibilities between the different nodes. So, for example, I've been doing a lot of networking in venture capital and startups, and they need to find each other because the venture capitalists want money. There are a lot of different venture capitalists that focus on different types of things, and there are a lot of startups that do a lot of different things, different verticals. Sometimes they are not necessarily always going to meet each other in a natural way. So by me going out and figuring out what being very attentive and finding out what everyone's goals are, what they're motivated by, it's very easy for me to set up a meeting that would otherwise have either cost them money or that they would never have had because just the world is a big place. It's very easy for people to miss each other. And so when I do that, cost me nothing. Not only do I give both of them value, but now my network has become sort of interconnected. Let me see. Right. So the thing about an interconnected network is that it is a lot more robust, right? As you give of yourself to others, right, and in a way that connects them with each other, now you have advocates that are talking to each other and reinforcing the positive image that they already have of you. And this is something that will extend out into your network versus if you have a very brittle network and everyone is connected only through you or only to you and they're not connected to each other, it's very difficult to hold on to everything. Whereas if you try to create this is a community in a sense. You're engineering a community around yourself. You're not necessarily giving it a name. It doesn't have to have a Facebook group. It just has to be a bunch of people that know you and that you know. And if you are able to create this kind of interconnected community with people sort of helping each other out and stuff like that, this is where within this robust network, you will begin to see the effects of your altruistic behaviors. Because in the long term, a really strong interconnected network is a place where opportunities will spring from. Now, this is kind of my last slide. Trust is emotional. Trust is subconscious. Okay, so if, for example, you meet an animal for the first time, and we are very much like animals, our emotions are, we are not elevated creatures. Okay, when an animal doesn't have a relationship with you, it'll be wary. Like if you try to pet an animal that doesn't know you, it might duck away, it might bite you or whatever, right? So in order to build a relationship, you have to convince it that you are not dangerous, right? Which means you have to be very careful about your behavior, adopting non-aggressive postures and that sort of thing. And then it has to think or understand that rewarding things come from you. So you give them treats. And you give them, sometimes with feral cats, for example, you might have to give them treats for a year before they are even going to let you be affectionate with them. So it takes a very long time before an animal is going to trust you. And I think the same of human beings as well. And human beings are not going to trust you or want to necessarily collaborate with you until they believe, one, you're not going to sabotage them. Number two, you are not going that something good is going to come from your direction, like they're going to be rewarded in some way. And so here's the good thing about having an interconnected, robust network is that there's already that trust baked in, because you get second degree connections telling each other that you're great. Okay, and this is, I talk about it like it's very simple, but it takes a very long time to engineer, and it took me a very long time. So it's very important to, when you meet people and when you sort of create these networks, you need to find out what they're motivated by. No, not every human being is going to be motivated by food like an animal, right? Human beings are a little bit more complex. So you need to find out what it is. Maybe they need a little bit more attention. Maybe they need some advice, right? Maybe they need you as a sounding board. Very often listening is enough. Listening and being present. But everyone has different needs. So the more attuned you are to other people's needs and figuring out a way to fulfill those needs without causing harm to yourself, like it's you don't just sacrifice yourself for others, like to the point of no return. The more you wire your brain in this way, the more likely it is you're going to have a robust interconnected network from which opportunities will spring, right? And how you get there is by understanding that this is a very long process within which you need to engineer short-term rewards to keep going. You meet one person, then you meet another person, right? And then through them, perhaps you meet others and you connect them with each other, right? And this is sort of like, this is the building process. You have to adopt a very long-term mindset. So that's my talk. And short-term rewards are what we are wired for, but we understand, because we have higher reasoning, that we need to think in the long term. We need to leverage our behavioral mechanics to reward us in the short term to do behaviors consistently for an extended period of time to gain reward in the long term. So when you think of networking, when you think of practice, when you think of exercise, you need to find ways to make it fun, make it rewarding in the short term, so that you can do it for a long time and then eventually reap the rewards. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Xiaoan. We're opening for questions from the audience, so please raise your hand or write online if you have any questions.
Hello. Any questions in the room? Okay, we'll go to the live stream first. Oh, it's a personal question.
Hi, Xiaoan, do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hey. First of all, I'm sorry we couldn't get you here today, but it's a really interesting talk. You're mentioning like when networking and stuff, that it's important to like really be attentive and listen all the way through a conversation. Sometimes my mind starts to wander. Do you have like a technique for like bringing yourself back into the conversation once you realize that you're starting to wander?
When you say that your mind starts to wander, could you elaborate on that? Like maybe give an example?
Yeah, it's, I don't know, for some reason, something is grabbing my attention in the room or something, and that kind of makes me think about something else. And then I'm like, oh shit, I should probably focus on this conversation. Where was I?
Right. Okay, so if it's a matter of sort of having lost somebody or lost something that you think might be important, I think it's okay to actually just stop the person and ask. It's very natural. It's just like, oh, I'm sorry, like that sound distracted me, and I think I missed the last few seconds of what you were saying. Could you repeat that, please? You know, I think that's a very polite. Let me just get rid of my screen share. That is a very polite way of just correcting the issue that you were facing. So I think it's okay to be direct, as long as you're honest. You just apologize, like, you know, start with an apology. People are very likely to respond with to an apology with, "Oh, don't worry about it." You know, it's a very natural response. So just say, "Sorry, I got distracted. Would you mind repeating the last thing that you said? It was so interesting."
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, no need to lie, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have a question from the live stream. When did you begin using altruism as an active part of your life and networking?
It wasn't a sort of a one day thing. It was there was a lot of I had a lot of reading over a number of years. So I went to a number of events. I tried sort of the very short-term networking. I tried very self-centered networking. I tried talking about myself a lot. I realized that a lot of those things didn't really work. Apologies for my camera freezing. It should be back in a minute. But yeah, so it took a long time, and then eventually I began to realize that many of my best opportunities came from relationships where I didn't really sort of expect too much in the short term, and I just tried to be helpful. Eventually, they led to huge things, actually. So I mean, I'm not entirely sure if I'm answering your question, but it took me a long time to sort of distill it down into this kind of mechanism.
I think it kind of lost connection.
Oh, very
Oh.
good. Hello. Do we have a question in the room? 1 second. Thanks, Joanne. That was really wonderful, actually. It struck a chord with me, and I realise I do the similar things. So, but thanks. I'm going to correct that. You go.
Thank you. You were talking about, when you were talking about altruism, you mentioned like giving something of value that costs almost nothing to you. Can you give some examples of how that would work out? How you've done that before?
Okay, sure. Is my audio coming through okay?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. My camera has been freezing a little bit, but should be all right. So examples of helping people in a way that costs you nothing. Sometimes there is information asymmetry, and not everyone knows the same thing. And sometimes something that, like for example, it takes me 30 seconds to 60 seconds to explain a very complex musical concept that someone didn't have the opportunity to go to school to learn. And so doesn't cost me anything, cost me like literally a minute of my time to just tell them something that's useful. So knowing a lot about a lot of different things can sort of help you to point people to resources that they might need. That's one. Another thing is sort of as you begin to have a broad network, eventually, as an audio person, you might know a lot of different kinds of audio people whose services do not necessarily overlap with yours. So if you're a composer and you know a bunch of sound designers, and some of them are good at magic, some of them are good at guns, a game developer comes along and just you make a recommendation, and both of them benefit from that, and it costs you nothing because you didn't lose any business, right? And now it is more likely that these two people are going to think positively of you. This is just within the context of game audio, but this happens a lot of different places. For example, I've met in the course of my networking outside of the game audio industry a lot of people who love music, but they aren't necessarily professional themselves. So for them, they consider it a great privilege to be connected to somebody doing it professionally, because this is something that they're very passionate about. So I can tell them things. I can share things with them that they would find very valuable, or I can teach them something, or I can advise their children if they're, I've done that before. So like there are some C-level employees of fairly well-known organizations who've connected with me online because I've just had an online presence as a musician. And, we just strike up friendships. And then it turns out I hear from them that their kids are learning music. And before they even have to ask, I just send over material that I already have sitting on my hard drive that could be useful for them. I offer, to have a quick phone call with them. It doesn't, of course, that technically doesn't cost you nothing. Costs you 10 minutes, costs you 20 minutes, but it doesn't cost you money. That's what I mean.
Cool. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes. Sorry, I'm just walking across the room. Here you go.
No worry.
He has arrived. Hey, thanks so much for the talk. First of all, I want to say I love your shirt. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Second of all, I think this is a question about being introvert or getting energy from not being around people. And I'm asking the question because it's also relevant now as we're starting a 2-day conference. So as an introvert, as you're going to a conference or being in a place for a period of time with a lot of people, a lot of networking happening, do you have any things that you kind of found useful for maintaining energy, for the need to rest, for basically how to balance that being an introvert?
Mm-hmm. So I would say concentrate on the quality of your interactions rather than than having a lot of them, because you have a limited stamina, right? So for me, when I'm at conferences and I get tired, and I just go off somewhere, and I don't talk to anyone for a little bit. So I mean, there's very little you can do there. That you can push yourself, but if you push yourself past a certain point, you're gonna have to like take a nap or recover or something like that. It's very difficult to sort of get around the fact that you're going to be tired. So I would say try to focus on the quality of your interactions rather than sort of do a spray and pray approach. So at this conference, for example, I don't know if, like, for example, the context in which you're attending, or how many people you already know, or if there is an attendee list. So for me, when I went to small events where attendee lists were available, I would check those out, and I would aim to talk to a few people that I thought would be the best use of my time. So it's because because you're an introvert, it will be difficult for you to wander aimlessly around a room and work the whole room. For an extrovert, that might be easy, but that approach can also be a little bit broad, and you can create very shallow connections that way. So it's always good to just try to focus on quality. You will definitely get tired. There's no real way to sort of like make yourself not tired quickly. You just have to rest. That's for me anyway.
Thank you.
That's some good answer. Do you have any advice for students or newbies or people who don't like? You got different variables. You could be an introvert and you could be an extrovert, but then if you could be both. Well, sorry, you can't be both, but you could display characteristics of both. Mm-hmm. But for newbies or a student who wants to break into the industry, they could struggle with that, even as an extrovert. Do you have any advice for students or just new people?
I think in the age of social media, right, I think it's very tempting for people to seek validation or posture or present themselves as being something greater than they are. And so, there's a lot of award-winning composers out there, for example, who have won some kind of dubious award, and I think that it really helps if you don't try to be anything more than you are. I think that for students or people who are very early in the industry, if you're talking to a fellow student, if you're networking with a fellow student, then you guys can commiserate on your shared experiences. If you're talking to somebody who is a little bit higher up the ladder, for example, an audio director or somebody who's been in the industry for many years, they're 56 years old, and you're like, in your early 20s, then there is no point kind of trying to be cool around them. Just interact with them honestly, taking into account your level. There's no need to be more than you are. You're okay. You're fine. You're okay the way you are. You will get to a certain point later on, but as you interact with people, like just if for example, is it more logical to meet somebody in a AAA studio as a student and try to get a gig from them, or ask them for advice? Which of these is going to be lead to the more likely scenario that you're going to get something out of this? It's probably asking for advice. And the usually senior people are happy to give advice. People have a desire to give back. If they're an asshole, then well, doesn't matter anyway. You don't really want to know them. But if they're nice and you ask for advice, they'll give you advice, and very often that can result in a long-term connection. They might know you later on, observe your work. Yeah.
Fantastic, wonderful. Yeah, that's some sage advice. Anybody else has a question? The semblance in this is a bit. Anybody?
Audio people.
Yeah, I know, dude. Yeah, I have.
Yeah, hi there. I guess as far as like you're saying, the sort of broccoli thing where you run into somebody where, you know, it's sort of a hard thing to do. How do you deal with rejection, like in the moment?
Rejection or failure very much depends on what your intended outcome was. Because if you said hi to somebody and they didn't say hi to you, if your objective was just to say hi to them, it's like, I mean, do you get what I'm saying? Like I think it's sort of like a frame. It's a mindset. Like, so the thing about, okay, let's assume you have been rejected. Okay, you went to a conference. You tried to talk to some people. You, like, for example, you went to a group, right? That was engaged in conversation. They seem to have open body language. You talk to them. They kind of like straight up ignore you, right? Is that the kind of thing that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a good example.
So there are several ways to deal with them. Some ways are a little bit, some ways are just primarily designed to sort of give yourself self-satisfaction. So if people ignore you, I have on occasion just kind of like step closer and I say hi, you know, and they have no choice but to respond, and that kind of gives me satisfaction because I just really don't like rude people. But it's not necessarily the thing that I'm not necessarily going to get anything out of it, because if they were ignoring me in the first place, chances are they're not nice. So there is something called you can, if you respond. Right, you can respond in multiple different ways, right? Either it will create a negative effect on the other person, or create a negative effect on yourself. Right? Treat it as a non-event, right? If a leaf falls, if the wind blows, there's nothing you can do about it. These people are part of the natural world, right? And if you talk to a tree and it doesn't talk back, right? It's okay. You know, you're not offended. It's just that because you expected, I guess that's it. If you expected a response, then you can be disappointed. But I think if you go in with an open mind, knowing that anything can happen, it's like, oh, that's interesting. They didn't respond. So, I mean, what's the most useful thing for me to do now? It's just go somewhere else and expend my energy in a place that's more useful. This is a difficult question to answer, because depending on sort of the fragility of your you know, personal insecurities and stuff like that, it can be very difficult. It can feel like depressing, like, oh, you know, I'm just not important enough or whatever, right? The punishment, that's just, you have a choice, right? You can't control the external stimuli, but you can control how much you punish yourself for that, right? As long as you don't go walking away thinking it's your fault, right? Then that's okay. You know, if it is your fault, you know, if you did something really dumb, like you tried to like you acted deliberately really weird, and then you think to yourself, okay, I that was wrong, I shouldn't do it again. right? But if you're just like a regular person, go up and saying hi. If you didn't have any control of the situation, you shouldn't punish yourself for it. You can't control the situation, but you can control whether you punish or reward yourself.
Yeah.
You should actually reward yourself for having tried.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, thanks for that. So yeah, basically, make sure when you're going into it that you don't have too much expectations, and then just go with the flow.
Yeah. It's one of those. Oh, sorry, I heard myself and I thought that was a question. It's one of those things. It seems like very annoying advice. Like, follow your passion is like the worst advice I've ever heard. I hate it. Like, just be so good they can't ignore you. I hate this kind. So, but for example, you're just like kind of go with the flow. Like, it kind of sounds like one of those things that is just a really annoying piece of advice to hear, but it's kind of true in that if something is happening, if you resist the course of nature, you will be up against nature. You'll be up against the universe, right? It's much better to just kind of accept that something has happened and then move on, especially because it hasn't caused you any physical injury. Any sort of negativity from it is really, it's in here. Not that it's your fault, right? But you have like kind of a choice to let it pass through or hold on to it. So it's kind of like meditation in a sense. It's like practicing meditation actively in a social interaction. Is that sometimes things happen, you allow them to happen, and then when the time has passed, like for example the feeling of disappointment, you don't hang on to that. Just let it go. You don't fight the feeling of disappointment. If you feel disappointed, if you feel insecure, it doesn't mean you're weak. It's a natural physiological reaction that you have no control over, but you can let it pass.
Yeah, I just have a comment to this because I do quite a lot in networking, and with rejection, I tend to do a little nasty thing where I think to myself, poor you, you're just an asshole. I'm so much better than you. And so that's my win. I'm just saying. I don't say it out loud. But there is a way to remember that you were just trying to be friendly and start a conversation, and then they don't want you there or whatever, or they act like jerks. And then it's like, yeah, poor you. I'm sorry for you that you have to be like that.
Yeah.
So we can turn
like, buddy,
things.
you missed out. You missed out on knowing me.
Yep, exactly. Very nice person, me.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's not a bad way, because it's kind of that defense mechanism is designed to protect the ego, right? By sort of boosting it a little bit, and that I can see how that would work, as long as it's sort of not something that you hang on to. I see no real problem. Like, for example, if someone I used to do something where if someone didn't respond to a follow-up email, I would send them another follow-up email to punish them until they they responded with a no or something, because I thought it was very rude for people to ignore me. But now, of course, like I don't need to do that anymore. I just kind of let it go, or I try to think of another way to get in touch with them. But yeah, there are a lot of different little Jedi mind tricks you can play with yourself. So what you just described is you're creating a little shield around your ego. Just don't keep that up for too long, because then it can sort of like descend into a kind of pathology later on.
Cool. Thank you. Sorry. I like this Star Wars pun. I got to pass you on to Sarah because we are running out of time. But this is a bit of a closed question. I'm sorry. Do you get great satisfaction when you network people and you just see them progress and have a good career or get a good gig and get a good reward for it?
Yeah, I try to surround myself with people that I like. And when you surround yourself with people that you like, it's very easy to feel happy for them. And if you don't feel happy for somebody else's achievements, and then it's kind of like an indication that you need to sort of look into yourself a little bit, because that's coming from you and not from them. So yeah, I think it's better to be happy for someone. So let me give you just a very short example. This was from the TV show Frasier, if anyone is familiar with it. There's this guy who who really hated this guy who sat on the board of an organization that he wanted to be part of, and that fellow was promoted to a position above that, and and then this guy was obviously very angry about it. Is like, oh, this guy is an asshole. He doesn't deserve it, whatever, right? And his butler, who was kind of like the voice of reason, said, "So what gifts will you be sending him to congratulate him?" Right? And he said that if you send him a gift, a well-placed gift may bring you into consideration for his vacated position in the board. And I think it is a little bit manipulative and political. I mean, this happens all the time, but if you respond to someone's achievements with reinforcement, they are more likely to think of you well. And that can only be good for you. Whereas if you actively show them that you're dissatisfied with their achievements, or you just like are weirdly silent about it, that's sort of a negative impression that they'll get from you, and then it damages the relationship. So it's just always better to just, if not feel happy about someone else's achievements, appear to do so.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you. And speaking of gifts, you're a gift. It's been great to have you here today.
Thank you.
I can speak on everyone in the room, but I do have to pass you on because we do have to wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And
My pleasure.
Can you please come here then next year?
I will very strongly consider it.
Yeah, do it.
I was very sad that I couldn't get to come this time just because of my schedule, but like I really want to be in Norway.
Yeah, we understand, but just bring some warm clothes. Thanks, mate.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, please give a warm applause for Xian Yi. It's been super great to have you here, and I will recommend everyone to read your article on LinkedIn about this. It's called Brain Hacking. Yeah, it's about the same, and it's absolutely great. So thanks again.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you. Now we're having a 10-minute break, so I will encourage everyone to eat. There's a lot of fruit and baked goods over here, so use your time well, and we'll be back in 10 minutes. time. Okay. Continuing on the path of building healthy and sustainable careers, I have a question for you when you're ready. And that question is, how was your burnout? Because I know you're there, and I know you're there. Did you lie in fetal position on the floor? Did you wake up 14 times a night with the brain racing at 1,000 kilometers per hour? Or maybe you experienced memory loss? I've seen it so much in the music industry, and I've understood that it's even more common maybe in your industry of crunch. And those of you out there who are now thinking, that will never happen to me, be careful. That might be a warning sign. We work in passion-driven industries, and it's so easy to get lost. How do we know our limits before we've felt them? Our next speaker is Erin Holmes. Erin played in a band, but she knew she didn't want to be on stage. She wanted to be behind the faders. And she's now a sound designer and composer, currently working at Servios, a game development studio in LA. In her talk, Prioritizing Fulfillment in an Industry of Crunch, she will explain how to not make concessions on your own happiness in order to forge a sustainable career path. To bring balance to her own life, Erin likes to get outside, surf, skate, climb, paint, hike, bike, and explore. She's an adventurer by heart. And I know she dreams of walking around picking lingonberries and cloudberries in the forest, so good you're here a couple of more days then. Please welcome to the stage, Erin Holmes.
Hello. I'm taking a more informal approach to the stage by not using the stairs. Okay, let's see. Let me get this up. Are we over there? That is not it. Okay. Perfect. Oh no, don't go that way. Okay. So hello. Honestly, it was great to come right after Sean because a lot of what he talked about is very relevant to what I'm about to speak about. But yeah, so we work in an exciting industry. We bring our passions to our day-to-day lives, and those passions are what brought us here. But what happens when we pour those passions into everything, into our everyday lives, every single day? We need respite, we need recovery time, and more importantly, we need nourishing environments to allow us to breathe. And, sorry, hold on. This thing is not going down. My apologies. I couldn't find my mouse. Right, so the last thing we want to do is wake up one morning and say, I can't take any more of this. So in challenging yourself to ask somewhat often uncomfortable questions, whether that is directed inwards at yourself or externally towards an employer or whoever that needs to be, you can align your personal happiness with your work without having to make decisions solely to fulfill your career needs and neglecting your own. So I am no expert, but I am stubborn, and I refuse to live a life that drains me daily just because it's what's expected or what's normal. So in this presentation, I will just explain how not to do that, how not to make concessions on your own happiness. So I grew up in New Jersey, in the suburbs of New Jersey in the US. My pronouns are she, they. I'm a white-passing, pansexual, non-gender conforming female working in a white, male-dominated industry. I lived in a single-parent household where we were not necessarily wealthy, but because of my hardworking immigrant parent who came to the US in her 20s, I had the privilege of getting a good education and never having to worry about, meals on the table or a roof over my head. So just disclaiming that this is shaped by my experiences, and I recognize that this will look different for everyone. Some of the things that allowed comfort in my life and allowed a certain level of flexibility perhaps may not be as simple for everyone, but disclaimers, blah, blah, blah. I do just recognize that sometimes it's a little more difficult to address some of these things when you have financial burdens. So regardless, I will start with our favorite topic, burnout. So in recent years, the average time people lasted in the game industry before burning out was 5 years. If you made it 5 years, you're considered a veteran. So congrats if you made it past 5 years. So what really is burnout? So occupational burnout is a state of physical and or emotional exhaustion that involves a sense of reduced accomplishment and also a loss of personal identity. Occupational burnout is the result of a long-term, unresolved job-related stress, something that is far too common and ubiquitous in this industry. The way our industry works and the pressures that we face daily cause psychological and physical damage that just goes unnoticed and unmanaged, but a lot of times, like I said, unnoticed. So it's common to hear stories about sleeping on the couch in the office or missing family get-togethers because of, somebody was crunching for 80 hours in a week, and this type of overload is documented, well documented within the tech industry and even the music industry, like Sarah said. So, and it's not even just documented within our media platforms, but news publishing such as like the New York Times and Time Magazine have done articles on it. And here are some examples of extreme cases of burnout from those sources. So I'll just go through some of these quotes real quick. The first is about a programmer who visited the ER multiple times, and the doctors were confused. They didn't know what was wrong with him until he revealed that he had been essentially neglecting his own needs in order to take a game from what he considered to be, going from good to great. He was just working. The second was a game designer. He suffered memory loss. We just heard that. And in the result of stress and anxiety from crunching on a game. Not great. The third is another programmer who just worked for so long and so hard that he found himself temporarily unable to get out of his car. So, the next dev here mentions that crunches turn him into a mindless zombie. And I think if anyone has, were overworked, let's say, you can probably relate to that. But when he says that when those types of crunches were done, his immune system just shuts off to essentially reset. And that is when he gets ill. That's normally when he gets sick. So he then goes on to say, for companies that have extended crunches that can last for months at a time, hospital visits due to exhaustion are the norm. They're normal. And that's not something you really want to be normal, in my opinion. But then he goes on to describe how it's not necessarily the complexity of the work that's bearing down on him, but rather the consistent amount of work that's just dumped in his lap and doesn't allow him time to breathe and come back to reality for a few minutes. So these are somewhat extreme examples of burnout, but burnout can surface in many different ways. Sometimes it's not this apparent and not this physically recognizable. It can creep up on you, without even noticing its effects beginning through months or weeks. And sometimes it takes a friend to just point it out and snap you out of it in order to realize it. So based on these accounts of burnout alone, it's not surprising that only 1/3 of the average developer remains in the industry for more than 10 years. 53% report that crunch is, and I'm going to define crunch real quick, it's just working for 40 hours or more than 40 hours per week over an extended period of time. They purport that that's an expected component of their employment, and less than only 18% report receiving compensation for those overtime hours. So the average number of employers a game developer might go through in a 5-year span is 2.2, which essentially means you have gotten so exhausted by employer number 1, so exhausted by employer number 2, and maybe exhausted by employer number 3 in 5 years, which is not quite so common in other industries. Not saying that inherently changing employers is bad, but it just kind of highlights that this type of turnover rate, it highlights the lack of longevity and sustainability in this field. So, is this sustainable? Obviously not, especially after thinking about the accounts of burnout we just heard. But I'd say really the real question that we're looking for here is, how can we create a sustainable career? How can we add years to our game dev life expectancy? Perhaps that's just by creating scenarios for us that cater to our individual needs and goals and lives, etc. So once again, we get into this industry because we are passionate about our work, but that doesn't mean we need to mistreat ourselves in order to do so. In fact, it means that we need to be more self-aware, have the ability to define our limits, and listen to our intuition more than those who perhaps aren't in careers that they're passionate about, mostly because we can get so wrapped up in what we're doing and just forget. So in order to do that, we need to address a couple things. We need to do some value and goal setting, learn our boundaries and find what balance looks like for us as individuals. And finally, we need to do constant reflection, self-reflection looking inward, but also external consideration of who and what our surroundings are, our community, our peers, our work environment. And once again, this is all true in every field, but because of the major stresses that we face in a field that we're so passionate about, it's very important for us to be aware of these factors for ourselves. So what do you want? And often that's one of the hardest questions to answer. Hopefully the following questions can help you sort of find the right direction towards those answers. What are your values? What are the core set of ideals that make up your moral DNA, really? Is it honesty, good communication, balance, transparency? What drives you? What drives you to do what you do? Maybe you're even just motivated by your values and upholding those types of things, but maybe it's financial stability and creative freedom. Yeah. And so one of the first times I hung out with a good friend of mine, we played a game, not sure if you're familiar with it, it's called We're Not Really Strangers. And it's a game where you pull a card and it prompts you to sort of dive into explaining parts of you that you typically wouldn't really dive into in casual conversation. And one question that came up that kind of really stuck with me, though extremely simple, was this. What's your idea of a perfect day? So your perfect day may have nothing to do with your work. Your perfect day may have something to do with your work. Both are fine. But I urge you to reassess and ask this question with your work in mind. How possible is this day with the career choices you're making for yourself? If your perfect day seems wildly unattainable, maybe there are some things you need to reflect upon in order to achieve that. Or maybe you need to lower your expectations, I don't know. So if I ask you what your goals in life are, what would you say? You can obviously answer in your mind. Is your answer fully rooted in your career? I find that most often people answer this question in reference to their career or in response to other societal expectations of them. But those aren't the only goals we can have. You might not know what your goals are or what you want in life. It seems overwhelming. But keep it simple and keep it loose. Keep it surrounding your values and then actively sort of take steps every day towards those things. Something simple, like ever since I was young, I knew above all I wanted to be in a career where I wouldn't wind up miserable just trudging through my day-to-day life, just making money, because just doing the things I have to do because it makes money, and I didn't want to lead an unhappy, stressful life where I didn't have time for the things and people I love. So even something that simple has always kind of driven me towards an end point, I suppose. And I think that keeping it simple like that is a good way to keep you on track. So I've chosen to separate how we look at goals into two different categories, which is kind of funny coming after Xiao-An, because he also talked about long-term and short-term things. But yeah, so we have our long-term goals and our short-term goals, and both of which contain personal and career portions. And personal that could be whatever that means to you, like the type of life you want, or where you see yourself living, or if you want a dog. But I think it's important to focus on your long-term goals first and foremost, as your long-term goals will dictate what your short-term goals will be. The small choices you make daily contribute to those short-term goals, which should be then supporting your long-term goals, not combating them. So kind of think of it like an umbrella. Your long-term goals are providing a shelter for your short-term goals. And as long as you're operating under that umbrella, you're in a good place. And if you choose to step outside that umbrella, just remember you're gonna get rained on. So I personally never really liked the question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Because I was so focused on the reality that things change constantly. The last time I was asked that was quite a while ago, which I'm happy about. However, in the way I responded, what I said was, I would love to continue doing what I love and what I'm doing from a remote island in Scotland. So pretty much every choice I've made has been a step towards creating a life where that could be possible. And yes, the constant change, the short-term, unplanned, unexpected, changes are inevitable, fluctuation is only natural, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to derail us from our goals. And it's how we deal with that change and apply it towards our long-term goals that will make the difference. So these goals will lead you to how fulfilled you feel. Fulfillment is kind of a nebulous thing. We kind of have to figure out what that means. And so if we can find that and we can incorporate it into our daily life, we can have it help us fuel our inspirations and our motivations going forward. But once again, we kind of have to figure out what that means. So maybe some of these steps can help us figure out what that means, once again. One way is just listen. It's kind of simple as that. You know yourself better than anyone else, but you may not listen to yourself as much as anyone else. It's sort of a lesson in learning to listen to your instincts and your gut, in scenarios from, does this person have my best interests in mind, to, does this studio that I'm interviewing with have, crunch culture deeply ingrained into them, or, does the team just kind of feel off? All these little things that we just kind of sometimes ignore because we have other, goals in mind that we're focusing on, and we just ignore those things and say, it'll be fine. But learn to listen to those things, and don't ignore what feels best for you. Another component, perhaps towards fulfillment, is trying to steer away from crunch mentality. Crunch mentality just brings with it many negative aspects apart from the big one we talked about, which is, burnout. It invites like a form of unhealthy competitiveness that just presents itself in various negative ways. And one of those ways is imposter syndrome, which I know I get a lot. Focus on yourself first and foremost. Try to break free of the concept of normal. Try not to fall into patterns and expectations that are deemed normal. Many in this industry are unhealthy patterns and expectations, and that's why it's so important for us to, kind of break out of those things and create an environment that is healthier for us to be in. Just don't get swayed by those external voices. You can acknowledge them, and you can consider them. I'm not saying don't take advice from your friends. Like, we're talking about the unhealthy types of patterns. But always decide based upon your own internal compass and how those things tie into what you want and need. And once again, sort of the easiest way to manage imposter syndrome is not to compare other people's achievements and your perception of their happiness to your own. They don't have the same goals and values as you, the same way we don't have the same taste in food or friends or partners. The type of games they want to work on to the type of environment they want to work in, those all will vary greatly. So fulfillment as well will present differently for them. Listen and learn to what drains you. Just know what you don't want, essentially. Some of my friends in the field that I look up to the most, I wouldn't want to repeat the steps that they took in their career necessarily, not because they're bad steps for them, but because what drains me, or because I know what drains me and I know what I don't want. So they're just not the steps for me. Find a good support system. And I think that's very important. Find a good community. Find people who will support you thoroughly and bolster you and who share the same values as you. People who encourage you to be your best and who are willing to share their knowledge and learn from you as well. And they value and respect you just as much as you them. And also just be perceptive of social pressures in your work environment. Observe carefully and constantly. Be wary of being in a low support system environment where there's a clear effort to reward imbalance, where they don't show any appreciation for the work that you do. Because this type of interaction will only just drain you and hinder your growth. So seek environments with frequent, supportive, constructive feedback, as they will nourish you best. And finally, find some balance and what that looks like to you. Understand your realistic limits. If you don't know what that is, just begin to slow down and listen carefully to where that tipping point is for you. It might be different for someone else as well, so once again, try to just focus on yourself when learning these things. And when we're surrounded by such a competitive environment, like the game industry, it's best to remove our self-worth from being corely rooted in what we do for work. In order to continue to have a future in this industry, we need to find a healthy mindset in how we view work and how it affects us. So find time for yourself, or make time for yourself, I should say, and do the things that replenish you and make you feel at ease and happy. And once again, a lot of this is kind of finding what things mean for you. So you kind of just have to check in with yourself very frequently. Sometimes we are moving so fast that we get swept up in what's right in front of us, that we miss what's happening inside of us, physically and psychologically as well. It's important to kind of constantly revisit this step and resituate ourselves depending on how we feel at the time. And sort of, it's most important to do so when we're feeling the most overwhelmed, even though that's the time you feel you don't have the time to. But if we do so in a time where we're just super stressed and overwhelmed, we can benefit from this, as it will offer us perspective and help us to kind of perceive what has been lacking in our lives at that time and what needs aren't being met that lead us to feel overwhelmed. So one way to check in with yourself is something called the Wheel of Development. Actually, it's technically called the Wheel of Life, but I call it the Wheel of Development because it suits me. So it's a tool for tracking growth in various areas of your life. What you would do is you separate it, circle out into however many categories that works for you, and define the areas that are important to your happiness, and then you would rate them on a scale from 1 to 10. These are the areas that I personally chose the first time I did it, or, well, that I continue to focus on. Relationships, that could be any sort of relationship, family, friends, loved ones, work, finances, hobbies, experiences. For me, that meant, travel, adventure, a sense of spontaneity, and yeah, just learning new things as well. An environment, that could be everything from, the physical walls inside my house, what my living room looks like, my living space, to external to those walls, the geographical location. If I'm in a city, is it loud? Is it quiet? How are the people? Are they nice? Are they, rude? Or how quick can I access nature and get away from the city if necessary? So, just an example. But then, of course, mental and physical health I also chose to focus on. So for the sake of the presentation, I just had that little wheel, but this is kind of the way that you would go about filling one out if you so desire. So once again, you would define those areas, whatever they are to you, and then you would either fill in on those sections wherever that point meets for you. Maybe you have a very bad social life right now, so you get to a 3, but etc. So the sections of the wheel represent various areas in our life that we want to improve upon. So it's extremely important to be brutally honest with yourself if you choose to do this exercise. Even though it's going to hurt looking at it, I know the first time I did, it was a shock. But this is what mine looked like the first time I did one. You can kind of see that I wasn't sure on a couple of them, but yeah, it's something I learned from a cognitive behavioral coach. And initially when I was told to make one, I kind of brushed it off and was like, oh yeah, I know what the numbers are going to be, it's fine. But it didn't really sink in until I put it down on paper and saw it for myself. What areas in my life were severely lacking at the time. And it's really interesting to do this somewhat frequently and check back in and see how those levels shift. Maybe if I did one, well, I actually have done one recently, and it's like everything shifts. It's very interesting to see how it shifts and what is, what has improved, and what areas you still need to implement change on. So like I said, if you once again, would like to do this sort of exercise, I recommend doing it every 6 months or any time you feel strongly about, maybe whether extreme highs or lows or have a big shift in life, a new job, a move, whatever, and just compare what sections score poorly or highly versus past times and now, and just reflect on why and what can you do to bring balance back to those areas. So everything up to this point is sort of a foundation. This is kind of the part that will really make the difference. This is, we've thought about the potentials of what we might want, and now it's kind of about taking action and implementing them. You will be quite surprised at how willing people are to support you when you express your needs respectfully. Just be confident enough in yourself to ask the difficult questions. However, don't just ask people for permission. Ask for their support. Give yourself permission first, and when you have done so, you've given yourself approval, you can present the topic confidently, which will allow whoever you're discussing this with to feel at ease rather than uncertainty. Show them that you've given it great consideration and you have the solutions to make it work. If you know that this is going to lead to a more content, at peace, productive version of you, then why would they combat you on that? They will try to find reason, they will try to support you. They will do their best, at least, to understand your perspective. And after all, this is going to benefit them as much as it benefits you, as you won't do your best work when you're in a situation you're unhappy with. Do your best not to settle for situations that will ultimately make you unhappy, solely to fulfill your career. And be truthful with yourself when you're making those decisions. This means that you, once again, have to know yourself sort of well enough to make those decisions accurately, but if you can revisit and reflect on those goals and values often, it might help guide you in those times. So this is a word that my audio team just loves. I don't know if it's just us, just let me know if any of you have ever heard this before. So get comfortable with this word. Just learn how to use it reasonably and probably, most importantly, diplomatically as well. Consider everything in front of you with intention. If something is just outside of what you can handle at that time, out of your scope, or just something you don't want to do for whatever reason, just have a discussion about it. Try not to extend yourself beyond reasonable capacity in order to be a people pleaser. People will honestly respect you more for setting responsible boundaries for yourself, and in turn, respecting their time and their product, because, like I said, you will not do your best work when you're outside of your limits. So, just learning those boundaries is just super important. But the same way we make adjustments to our project for scope, understanding what adds value, iterating, efficiency, all these things apply to your life as well. Give yourself a pulse check. Like I said before, just check in with yourself. Maybe you use the wheel of development or whatever tool you decide, just check in. And then reassess based on the needs, your current needs at the time. For example, what I needed, right now, what's perfect for me right now is not going to be perfect for me in 3 years, and definitely was not perfect for me 3 years ago. So just, you can't apply the same thing to every chapter of your life. And declutter your life, do a little spring cleaning in the same way we do that to other aspects of our life. Just understand what's no longer contributing positively to your growth. And iterate, try again, move forward, and hopefully, having done all this thinking, we can carry on with a better idea of how to move forward So lastly, you don't need to be defined by your career, but if it's something you like, which we love, hopefully, just make sure you are actively and persistently taking the steps we talked about to do so in a healthy way. To keep your mental and physical and interpersonal well-being, especially because this is something we love to do, and in an industry that we love to be part of, it's just very, very important to be cognizant of how you treat yourself in order to maintain and achieve a long-term and hopefully fulfilling future in this industry. So I have just I made some QR codes. I hope it works. Don't know if it's gonna work, but on the left, we have a very simple, a very simple wheel of development template to use to as you see fit if you want. It's just a little picture of it, so you can either just base it off of it or print it out, whatever. And then on the right is a very interesting paper that I came across it was titled State of the Industry 2019, Mental Health in the Games Industry. And the paper discusses certain trends in the industry that have negatively impacted the mental health of its employees and leaders. And it goes into everything from medical descriptions of chronic stress on the body to inclusiveness and diversity in the workspace. So I found it really useful information, and it's just very fascinating. It's a research paper, so it's not super, story-driven, but it's very fascinating for sure. And yeah, so if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to let me know. If you hated this topic, or or if you would like to open up a conversation about it, hopefully there was something in there that's helpful to you. Yeah, and feel free, you could find me on the contact form on my website or on Twitter, or send me an email, whatever you like. And that is all. Feel free to go out and say no.
Thank you so much, Erin. I'm definitely going to use the wheel of development. Love it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, we have a question over there.
Yeah, it works. The QR code works too. It does actually work.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey.
Yes, thanks for the talk. I was just thinking that there's this thing about, I guess, a lot of us, that we work with something we love that sprang out of our hobbies.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm really guilty in that sense that well I let my professional life be my worth, I guess, and I think it's very easy to become my own worst enemy in that sense, because I just it's like self-imposed crunch, I guess. So I would just like to know if you have some thoughts on that. How to separate? Do I just need another hobby? Okay.
That would be a very simple way of putting it, and also not a very helpful one. Unfortunately, that is part of it. It's honestly trying to find something else that just gives you reprieve from what you're doing, because no matter what it is you're doing, even if you were doing that hobby every single day, all day, every day, you're gonna get exhausted, from that hobby, and you're not gonna wanna do that hobby anymore. It's like, sprinters don't do the whole marathon. They do small portions, and they have to recover in between. So in that same way, I think it's no matter what it is you're doing, whether it's, I don't know, whatever hobby you decide to choose or your work, it's just so important to force yourself to have that separation. Even if you love it so much, you still need a break from it, I think. I don't know if that was helpful. Find another hobby.
Some on-stream, like online first. Let's get that.
Okay, so Almut Schwakis is hi and is asking, what do you do when you actually are not sure of your goals for one or more parts of your development wheel?
So the development wheel focuses on whatever you think is important to making you happy. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be something super specific like career-driven goals or, yeah, it can be whatever you want it to be. So, I mean, you can just, like I did, you know, I went online, honestly, the first time I did it, and I looked at, you know, examples. And a lot of the examples were, you know, the different categories they had already, I didn't quite like what they were, so I just made my own. Like one of them, well, I don't need to describe them, but yeah, so I just kind of morphed it to be whatever I felt was important to me. And I'm sorry if this is not super helpful, but it's kind of just, listening to the aspects of you that, you know, when do you feel the worst and when do you feel the best? And if something is affecting you that much, that means it must be important to, you know, your growth and development. So perhaps that's something you want to focus on in your wheel. I hope that's helpful.
Hi, Erin.
Hey.
Loved your talk. I was just wondering, you mentioned in the talk you want to disassociate your work and your quality of your work from your self-worth. Do you have any techniques for that, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, this is one of the questions that I knew was going to come up, but is a hard one to answer. It's very hard, yeah. And it's kind of similar to, you know, the question from before about, you know, removing yourself from your work, and that kind of, it's honestly just like unlearning bad habits that we've learned from, well, to call back on Xiao An's talk, it's the dopamine rush we get from doing something that we love. So if we love our work, we're just going to be addicted to doing it. But once again, we have to like force ourselves to find a balance and separate. And removing yourself from the self-worth being rooted in the work because you're so obsessed with it, like, it's hard to remove yourself from that. But I think the only real answer I can really give you is you have to try very hard and perhaps find people, you know, in your community. Yes, there's going to be other people who are obsessed with work as well, but you need to find those people. I see you looking. You need to find people who can help you break out of that and who also have, who want to incorporate a healthy balance into their life, whatever that means for you guys.
Thanks, Erin. That's really cool. I just actually had a question for the audience, in a sense, for a bit of crowd participation. Put your hands up if you've actually crunched and worked too hard. Okay. And keep it up, and put a second hand up if you haven't known that until it's too late. All of us, pretty much.
Yeah.
I don't know what has contributed to that, probably just the love of work or just your employees. The question you mentioned earlier about saying no, that's confrontation, and a lot of us don't like it. Have you got any tips to sort of have that conversation without it being too daunting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, just the word no itself is absolutely, inherently, it seems kind of scary and daunting, and especially if we're the types of people who just, you know, kind of like are people pleasers. But the best advice I could give in, you know, a work environment, saying no in a work environment to, you know, what if maybe it's just whatever requests are coming your way, is essentially you kind of have to set yourself up with documentation and kind of outline why it's not going to work. You kind of have to back yourself up before you say no. Just get yourself prepared and get yourself to a place where you can say, hey, listen, I would love to, if that's possible, but due to these reasons, perhaps it's not in our best interest to do that right now. And so it's kind of not just saying no, just straight out like that, but it's finding, like I said, a diplomatic way of doing that in a respectful way so that you can maintain your ties with your coworkers without creating friction in the workplace. So yeah, it's just kind of learning how to turn people down nicely and just say, and maybe it's possible that, you get through a bunch of work and it opens up and you can do it. But you've outlined the fact that, hey, I might not be able to get to this. So I just want to let you know, first and foremost, it's probably not in the scope of what we can handle right now.
Just being honest.
Yeah, just being honest.
Yeah.
It's hard to do, yeah, for sure. But it's those difficult things, like I said, it's those difficult questions or responses or whatever discussions that I think are the most essential to kind of push ourselves to do, especially when it involves our, health.
Yeah. And that's so crucial, isn't it? Just openly having the discussions. Yeah, super cool. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it over to Sarah real quick. Do we have another question, or are you good?
Yeah, just a comment based on my own experience with burnout. Like, you can keep your head above water for quite a while working, but then you also take away the capacity if something happens in your private life. Like, there's so little, if something happens, then you might suddenly face the burnout because you thought everything was going okay, and then it's just this little thing outside work that can make you kind of hit the wall because you didn't realize that you were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even coming...
Use your capacity.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
Sorry. Yeah, and even coming from my mindset where I'm just constantly thinking like, I don't want to overwork myself. I just came into this thinking I don't want to burn out of this, so I'm going to treat myself well. A few months ago, I experienced this where I didn't realize that I had these burnout, symptoms coming on, and I was talking to a friend, and they just go, "It sounds like you're experiencing burnout," and it hit me immediately after that. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm experiencing burnout. I thought I was good at keeping myself from doing that, but sometimes it happens, and yeah."
Any more questions from the audience?
Oh.
Run.
Yeah, running. Just my best.
You should get a skateboard or a scooter.
There's lots of scooters in the city.
Just conclusively, any tips if you are facing burnout but you can't quit work because that's not feasible?
Tips on, sorry.
How to deal with actually having a burnout but you can't take a break?
I see. The first thing I have done in that situation, and because it's like, you're doing during a very busy time and you honestly can't take off of work or anything, hopefully you can have this sort of discussion with your supervisor, your manager, your boss, your director, whatever. I'm fortunate that I have an environment in a team that I can do that openly. And so the moment I felt that, I just brought it up to my director and I said, "Hey, I'm feeling like this." And the moment I told him, he said, "Let me see how we can alleviate some of that from you." And so even if you don't have such a close connection to whoever you're working with, I think it's important to, at first, the moment you first notice it, to bring it up and just say, "Hey, I'm feeling like this. I'm not going to be able to get my work done because, I'm just not feeling good." They are going to try to help you. Even if, you don't have a close connection with them, they realize what's at stake for them as a company. If you can't do your work, they don't get their project done. So regardless of your connection, I think it's very important to just bring it up and say, "Hey, I'm not feeling great. Is there anything we can do to give me some breathing room. And then perhaps after that time period is over, then, and at the same time, do your best to do those things that relieve you of stress. And again, it's hard to do when you're in the thick of things, to remember to do the things that are good for you. Even if it's just like taking a walk and in forcing breaks upon yourself. I used to have an app that was actually called Stand Up, because I would just forget to like stand up, or now we have like standing desks, which is great, but I would use that reminder to just like remind me to go get some water, or like do the necessities in order to live. Like I personally get so tunnel vision and super focused that I forget to eat, I forget to drink water, I forget to go to everything, so I need something. It kind of sucks to say that I need something to remind me to do those things, but yeah, just kind of force those things upon yourself, as well as just bringing it up and having that open conversation with your coworkers, because if you're feeling that way, it's possible they're feeling that way too. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you. Give a warm applause to Erin. Oh, there's one more comment or question. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Liam.
Hi. About the development wheel, I've been sitting and thinking about that and how it would look for me right now, which we're in a point of time where there's a lot of uncertainties, money coming in, projects going out. And I figured, when in my life am I going to have like a 10 score on all of those pieces of cake? I can't see it happening. Like the perfect solution would be to have like a 2 on everyone, because there's 24 hours a day. And if I'm working 12 of them, I'm crunching. So it's kind of hard to fit all of those things. Maybe I'm greedy. I want to be in the woods all the time, but then I can't be at work all the time. Yeah. So how do you feel, or how do you see a good wheel? Kind of, how do you think about that without being depressed?
Well, yeah, that's kind of something that I thought about the other day as well. The other day when I was piecing this together, I was thinking, is it like realistic? Like, am I going to get a 10 in any of these? And especially because I think a lot of us are perfectionists, and that's why we end up in crunch anyway. I think it's just setting reasonable expectations for yourself. And so maybe I was looking at like, okay, is there ever gonna be a point where I'm a 10? Okay, maybe not. Like, maybe, that'd be great. But for me, I was like, what is my reasonable expectation of what I'd like things to be at? If I'm at an 8 or a 9 in all of those things, or most of those things, that's pretty good. So I think it's finding maybe the level where you start to feel like your well-being is degrading. If it's like below a 6 or something. And I think for me, I started to think about it at the 5 point is like maintenance. It's like, I'm okay, I'm not bad, I'm not good. So that's kind of where I was situating it, so that it's a little bit more realistic than saying like, if anything's below a 5, I'm not doing good. And if anything's above a 5, I'm fine. So I guess, once again, it's kind of just defining what that is for you. And maybe just be a little kind to yourself when doing that. Like, definitely the first time I did it, when I looked at those numbers, it hit me really hard. But that's kind of like a wake-up call. If you have a lot of those numbers that are making you feel depressed, maybe that's something you want to change, perhaps. So I don't have the perfect answer on how to get a 10 out of 10 in your life, but yeah, just setting reasonable expectations, I think, is the best approach to that.
Yeah, thank you so much. A warm applause for everyone.
Thanks so much.
Okay, let's have a break and be back at 12:20. Music. So please give it up for Alexander Espeseth.
Hi everyone. See if I can get this to work. There we go. Yeah. All right. Hi. Yeah. Okay. So I'm here to present to you the initial start of my PhD. That is what that's what I'm presenting to you today. I call it. It's a nice name, right? It's a big title. Accessing Visual Impairment Through Ludosonic Literacy. With that title in itself, there's a lot of words that are unfamiliar to people. So I'm going to go through everything a little bit, step by step. But I will start with... Oh yeah, by the way, if you can get all the backgrounds of the you can see here today, it's a little bit extra points for you guys. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about who I am and why I'm doing this. I'm a composer and a sound designer for games. And I am also a bass player for prog metal bands. It's kind of weird to stand here on the stage today without an instrument. I feel kind of naked, but it's cool. Yeah, so, but mostly I'm a gamer. I grew up playing games, just as I would guess all of you. But growing up with that, I was kind of curious to see like how everything worked, like growing up as a musician and starting to compose. Like I was kind of pushed into my field without even knowing it. It's kind of nice. So I started studying music, as many do. Took a bachelor's degree in performative music, contemporary music, and moved on to a master's degree in musicology, where I started to study ludomusicology, which is the study of sound and music in games. That is where I got the motivation for this project. So, right now I work at Høgskolen Kristiania, or Kristiania University College. And I sat down one day with my colleague, Trygve Bjelvåg. He's the head of game design there. It was in the midst of my master's degree, and I just needed to talk, because there was a lot of writing, so I just needed to converse with people. And we talked about how you can kind of know where you are in the game based on the sound and the music. Like, for example, Monkey Island 2, one of my favorite games of all time. The sound designers there did something brilliant in my mind, where maybe if you're in a wood shop, they would have rhythmical elements. That would be a saw or hammering some nails down, and that would tell the player where you're at. You're in a wood shop. That makes sense. And then he started to kind of think a little bit and was like, yeah, have you read about this blind gamer, Terry something? And that's when we kind of found this article about Terry Garrett. He calls himself the blind gamer. He is known for going through both Abe's Odyssey, Oddworld, Abe's Odyssey, and The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time without seeing, just based on sound. It took a long time, but he did it, and that's an incredible feat in itself. You can see his setup here. It's 2 small speakers mounted with duct tape to his chair, and that's kind of, my motivation kind of grows a little bit more for every step here, and I started thinking we have to be a better way to do this. We have to come up with that. We have so much great technology today. That is not a way for a guy to play games. So that's when I dug a little deeper, and I found Steve Saylor, another blind gamer, as he calls himself. And He is an advocate and for accessibility in games. He is often called in by game studios to so the studios can understand what blind gamers are choosing or what they want when they're choosing a game. So he's often a spokesperson for blind people when it comes to game playing. And what kind of tipped me over in this project was his reaction when he found the accessibility system in Last of Us Part 2. I think we're just going to watch a little bit of it because it speaks for itself.
Y'all don't even know. Y'all don't even know. I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say. There's so much here.
Yeah, I think we all get his reaction and why he's reacting like that. Because for a person to being able to play a game after being a gamer his whole life, fully for the first time in his life, when he's around 20, 30 years old, I understand that reaction. If that doesn't get you motivated to like dwell deeper into this, I don't know what would. But with that introduction, I kind of want to talk a little bit about two words or two terms that I'm going to use a little bit more, and I already used it a lot. Accessibility is the first one. I'm going for a definition based on product design around accessibility. And it states as, accessibility is the design of products, devices, services, vehicles, and environments so as to be usable by people with disabilities. So with that meaning, I'm going to go further to ludosonic literacy. Ludosonic literacy is a mouthful of a word. It's a little too long, in my opinion. And I can be critical of it because I coined it in my master's, so I regret my chosen word, but it is what it is. It's based on Jose P. Segal's ludo literacy, which means what we expect when we play games, what we grew up to learn, and what we want to happen when we play games. And it goes for board games, card games, video games, all the games. And an example would be in Monopoly, you move with the clock. And in Super Mario, the old classic Super Mario, you move towards the right. And that is kind of imprinted in our brains when we know what to do when we start up a game of Mario, because we most likely have played it before. There are exceptions, of course. As the background states, with Hollow Knight, you don't move to the right, even if it's a 2D game. So there's a lot of exceptions, but we have a kind of expectation when we start up a game on how the game works. So I took the same kind of recipe and added sonic in the middle to include sound. So I have two examples here. It's based on the same explanation where sounds in games can be, we can feel it's a positive sound or a negative sound based on what's happening on the screen. But with us having a tradition of like 50 years to go on with games, we now have like an expectation of what sounds are used for. So, for example, our first example here in Super Mario. There's no sound. With this, we have a expectation of a positive thing happening because we finished something. We can see that we're coming to a goal. We're jumping on a flagpole. We hear a positive, triumphant musical cue, as well as some fireworks. But it's also, all these sounds could work on themselves without the visuals. We hear the sound of going down the flagpole, we hear the triumphant sound cue, music cue, and we hear the fireworks. All of them are described very well to the visuals, but they can also stand on their own. Another typical musical trope, or what do you want to call it, is when you're low on health in games, like in Pokemon or in Zelda. Let's look at our example. I'm not going to listen to that for 2 minutes, 42 seconds, but most of us have heard this before. We played games where you get hit a lot and you are almost dying. So the game is telling you that you have to be careful, you have to do something to not die, and it does that with a dissonant sound going against the piece of music to kind of make the player feel urgent about it because they hear something that doesn't work with the music. That kind of, in our brains, we're wired to react to that. So, okay. Just going to run through my disciplinaries very fast because it's an academic piece of work, so I kind of have to get into it, but it's actually kind of exciting when I started to look into what kind of disciplinaries I'm actually delving into. And musicology is where I'm based at. That is where I start everything, and that's my main disciplinary. But my interdisciplinaries with sound design studies and game studies makes sense because we're trying to understand how games work, how they're built up, how we can use that to make something new for other people to enjoy games. As well as accessibility studies makes a lot of sense since we're dealing with people that need accessibility to play the games. But the one on the bottom there, I'm not a person that knows a lot of neuroscience, but I quickly understood that I have to understand how the brain reacts to sound and how the brain reacts to music. And after some research, I understood that if you're blind, you have stronger hearing senses, and therefore you react to music and sound differently. And that is something, to go on to a project doing something like this it's huge for me to understand that, to take that and work with that, to create what I'm looking for. Okay, now I am looking kind of for some help from you guys, because I have 5 questions where I want you to talk to the person next to you or wherever they are for 30 seconds and discuss a little bit. Where I'm not looking for answers, I'm looking to kind of get your brains going a little bit. Okay, so how does compositional design and sound design affect accessibility possibilities? I'd love for you to talk for 30 seconds. See, is there anything? Does it affect you? Talk a little bit, yeah? Okay. All right, right. So, I love this. I love to see that you're all talking. But now I want to know what does it affect how we're, yeah? Does anyone have a comment? Can I hear something from you? Yes.
There's a whole extra sense that you get to deliver information through. So if someone struggles with other senses, be it sight, be it touch, whatever, they can still get the information you give them through audio.
Right. So, in a nutshell, we're working with something where we have to take kind of extra caution to something, where we have to work a little bit more. Maybe we have to have a lot more sounds to help them help describe where they are in the game. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we have to work with, but necessarily does it have to work with our design? Do we have to change how we work with music, or can we stay the same and just add something on top in the end, or just change it a little bit, or sprinkle on top? That's kind of what I wanted to know with this. But then, here we go. What amount of extra work does this mean for the developers? And is it financially justifiable to all studios? That's a big one. Take 15 seconds. I know you all have some thoughts, but take 15 seconds to talk, yeah? All right. Shoot. Come on. Does anyone have any thoughts about this? Does anyone work in the studio that has any thoughts about this? Because that would be interesting. No? Okay, yeah. Go.
I think like if you work in a bigger studio that has a competent sound team, it's more about focusing on the right things. So it doesn't have to be that much extra or any extra work. It's just about doing the right thing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you research and focus. But then, of course, like a smaller studio that maybe doesn't even have a dedicated audio person, it's of course a huge task because they have to have a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So just to say what I said for this ones on the stream, it's a huge task for a smaller studio because maybe they don't have a dedicated sound team. But for a bigger studio that most often would have a dedicated sound team, it would be just like a focus on, like the switch on focus on your time. So yeah. I'm not here to give answers. I'm really just here to hear what you think. Yeah.
This is more general accessibility based, but I worked for a student company for a year, and one of my titles was accessibility manager, so I did a lot of focus groups and a lot of asking. I was an accessibility manager at a student company for about a year, and I noticed that while I would put in a lot of work to plan and find out what could be possible avenues for accessibility, we found that it was very... I was often met with, well, I'm sorry, we don't have time, we'll have to leave that for the end. We ended up getting a dyslexia font in, and that was about it for accessibility. So yeah.
Yeah, that is, I would guess that's a lot of the experience that smaller studios experience. Because they don't have time, they don't have money. It's a big thing. I'm just gonna move on because I'm running out of time, and I was not expecting. Would there be any problems around the globe because of the different sonic traditions? 15, 20 seconds, come on. Okay, sure. Does anyone have any thoughts around this? Yes. There's a microphone over there.
Who are we? Oh, yeah, okay. Halfway. Lovely.
Hi. I think it's not too much of a problem anymore because of globalization. But I think the most important part would be the game being... oh my god, my words, they escape me. But as long as the game is consistent with their language within the audio, it can help a lot. And I also think to just add as a thing for those who struggle with hearing, for a cartoony game, I think you'd add something like onomatopoeia text and stuff. Like in Japan, it's very common in manga to have like mogu mogu for chewing, for example, and such. And I think that could help both issues.
Yeah, that's awesome. Just what I want to hear. That's it's really interesting that, yeah, we do have a lot of different sonic traditions, but because of the globalization we're facing, they're not that big anymore. But if that would be a problem, I'm not sure. Maybe not. What my first thought about this was when I thought of people that use different scales than we do, except for like minor, major, and the module scales. That's our safe corner around here. And then we like move outside of that, and we're like doing like quarter step music, and I'm like, whoa, I don't understand what you're trying to say to me, but it's cool. But would that be a problem? I don't know. It's exciting to think of. Okay, will focus on accessibility interfere with the creative work and the expression of the composer and sound designer? I'm not asking if it changes the compositional design, I'm just asking if it would change how we write music and make sounds for games. Okay, 20 seconds, come on. All right. Would it kind of be in the way of how we compose music for games? Would it be a good thing? Would it be a bad thing? Does anyone have a... Yeah, sure.
Hang on, we'll just get the microphone to you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Just everyone wants to hear it. Oops.
How I see it is, it's basically you give a frame to someone who's creating the music and the sounds. And often, the most, people get more creative the more limitations they have. So I would think if you put this is something you have to work within. You'd get more creative music, more creative sounds, and more stuff we haven't seen before that could then be taken further. So I would say, yeah, it would definitely change how people would create, but I think it would be for the better, more than for the worse.
Yeah, awesome. I like that positive thinking. That's really cool. It's just what I've been discussing it a lot with colleagues, my partner, everyone. We're like trying to get different thoughts to see. I would just first one, I want to see if the question works, at all. But it's really cool to think of. Some people are negative-minded and think like, yeah, it's going to be really hard for me to work with this because you're limiting me from doing what I want. I want to express myself. And there's the one like, yeah, I think that would be cool to just like start something new and like not do something I've never done before. I think that would be awesome. And then you have all the limitations from before with creating for that specific game you're creating music or sound for. So that in itself is another thing. But yeah, another one.
2 seconds. Yeah. I was just thinking that I guess a stronger emphasis on the whole sound department is a good thing because then I guess, a stronger idea of the importance of sound is a motivation in itself. So I guess instead of interference, it would probably add more inspiration and of course a greater attention to details and nuances. Of course, it means more work, but I guess as long as it follows the stronger emphasis and I guess resources, that must motivate people. I would guess.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I like this. So I was really scared that no one would talk. So this is really good. Okay, so the last one is not. You don't need to answer. Come up to me afterwards and talk to me. That would be great. But can a universal tool be created that most of the game industry could use? And that is kind of the boiling point of my whole PhD. It's I want to, or I wish to, create a kind of sort of plugin that would detect all the triggers and know where's all the music in your program, if it would be through the middleware or through Unreal or different motor. That's up to, we're gonna see that. We're really early in the stages of everything. So, but that's the main motivation, the goal, to create something that is easily picked up by all studios, not just the big ones, but that can be laid on top of your project, detect everything, and then just add in the accessibility features for the visually impaired. That's what I want to do. Yeah. Okay. Really fast, I'm going to go through what The Last of Us has done, because I'm modeling my work. Yes, Theo.
Okay, just before you get into this, I was just going to ask one thing. When it comes to accessibility and when you think about multiple countries global-wise, right? In a way, accessibility could be like localization of voiceover. Because although lots of sounds are the same, experiences could be different around the globe. And if you think, for example, of sirens in multiple emergency vehicles, they are different in every country. And some countries could have one siren that's for one specific vehicle that's for another. And for someone who can't see, they are used to those specific sounds. So they know which car they're hearing, for example. So then that's something that could be an extra challenge, as actually not only creating a tool that would also go into the matter of being accessible for everybody, but it would also have to be localized.
Right. Yeah. So think of that with that fits right into the sonic traditions, how that would kind of make this a little bit harder. And I feel like there's ways to work around this, but that's a huge challenge. If there's different sonic traditions that would kind of break a moment in a game, and that we have to fix that through a kind of system that's put on top of everything, it's going to be a really hard way to work. So that's for sure a thing that we need to look into. Thank you. So for Last of Us Part 2, I'm modeling my work after what they did for accessibility here. I'm just going to quote what PlayStation said about the accessibility system. From a very beginning, Naughty Dog's goal has been to ensure that as many fans as possible have an opportunity to experience the game through their most robust accessibility features set to date. Building upon the foundations established with Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, The Last of Us Part 2 features more than 60 accessibility systems with expanded options focused on a fine motor and hearing, as well as completely new features that benefit low vision and blind players. Naughty Dog encourages everyone to take advantages of these features to create a gameplay experience that is right for them. I feel it's beautiful that they give you everything that you could want to make the game yours, the best possible for you. So I'm gonna run through these because there's so much here. Like, we have navigation. This is all the accessibility features for people with lower vision. Navigation assistance, traversal assistance, ledge guard, infinite breath, skip puzzle options, enhanced listening mode, scan range, scan time, text-to-speech, travel cues, combat audio cues, combat vibration cues, guitar vibration cues. Yeah, and then you have the sliders on everything that you can just control everything and just make it yours. And I think that's beautiful that they just give you the options here. Oh yeah, just gonna show you one short clip of this. If it wants to. Yeah.
Who do you used to do this route with? Jesse? Eugene. Right. Ah, Eugene. Man, he was funny. Oh, yeah. Plus, he taught me about rewiring electronics and stuff. May we all be that sharp at 73. May we all make it to 73.
Yeah, so it's like really short cues that tells the player what they need to do at any given moment to traverse. Like you hear the sound here.
Electronics and stuff. May we all be that sharp at 73.
That tells the player what button they need to press. So that's just like a little short showing of a lot. They have so much in this game. I urge you to just check it out. It's amazing. So my future is to kind of get funding for this project because it needs to have funding if I'm going to do this full time. It's a lot of hours to put down. And finally, a collaboration partner. So I'm really, as I said, in the start of this project. But if I can give you something to, I kind of want to give you, sorry. If I can give you something to go away from this talk is, whenever you create music and sound for games, have this in the back of your mind, that there are people that want to play your games, but doesn't necessarily could. So just have that in the back of your mind when you create this amazing art that you have all the time. Thank you. Are there, or do we have time? I don't know. Yeah? Yes, there's some questions in the front here.
Yep. Thanks, Alex. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, really good. I have questions, but we'll do it over a bit.
Great presentation, and it sounds like a very great project.
Thank you.
Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned something about a few disciplines. And one thing that I thought maybe could have a very good place there, which is very connected to everything that has to do with the brain and neurological stuff, is psychoacoustics. Have you have any idea or any consideration about delving into that field as well?
I've heard about it, and I've looked a little bit into it, but I am not familiar with it at all. So I would love to get some, if you have some readings, I would love to have anything you have.
Sure.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Hey. First of all, I want to say that I really love your T-shirt. It's really, really cool.
Thank you. I was hoping someone would notice.
Yeah, I love that game as well. That is really nice. Yeah. So you have been talking about that you want to pretty much make this universal plugin that's pretty much just plug and play. I can imagine that's a really, really hard task to do. Could there be any universal guidelines or some some rule sets that the game studios could apply to their game with accessibility instead of having this plugin? Like, especially with audio, what's the top 5 things that you can do to gain accessibility?
Okay, yeah. So if I understand the question, you kind of looking to generalize the plugin in itself?
Yeah, I mean, it of course also depends on which kind of game that you're making. If you're making a first-person shooter, or if you're making a 2D platformer. But are there any like global guidelines for audio accessibility?
I think there's a lot of guidelines when creating plugins for, say, let's use Unreal. I think there's a lot of guidelines, and there's kind of what makes it user-friendly, because there's a lot of plugins that's not user-friendly. We know that. And to create something that someone could with ease pick up and put over their project, it has to be really general and really basic, but also really being able to customize it like 100%. So it's a really fine line, like in between how to create something like that that is not like impossible for developers to use, but it's also possible for developers to form around their project. So it's a huge task. I'm scared to my life. I'm not a programmer, but I feel like after looking around, talking to programmers, talking to designers, I feel like it's possible. And I feel like we have now is the time, because we have the technology, and it's kind of about time as well. So yeah, for sure I would need to sit down and talk to sound designers as well as whole game studios to understand what they're looking for when they're gonna slap a plugin on top of everything. So yeah, for sure. Thanks.
Oh yeah, sorry. We have time for one more question, and then got to throw to Sarah for lunch. I'll give you that chance. But any questions that you may have, just seek out all the speakers post today, just in case we run out. I'm going to try and get to everyone, but just letting you know.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Have you researched? Thank you. Have you researched accessibility regarding different platforms? I mean, the PC games, mobile games, VR games, for example. Are there any drastic differences between them?
Yes and no, in sorts. It's kind of, all of them are different because they need to tell the player different things. But in sort, they're also the same. It's a really weird question to answer because in most what you're communicating with the player through sound is understood through the sound. But if you're communicating something like a press of a button through sound, it's going to be kind of slightly different sounds for the same thing. Because even if Last of Us doesn't use a pling sound, but say Pokemon would, that would still make them, they're going to ask for the same thing, but it's going to be different sounds. But yeah, in sorts, when you're playing like a bit game contra a third person, say Last of Us again, it's going to be different sounds all over the game because there's different kind of sound profiles all around. So I would say they communicate the same thing but with different sounds, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much, Alex, for your great and important talk. It's time for lunch break now. I want to thank Alex, Erin, and Xiao An, our speakers so far, for your talks on important topics. And thanks to you in our audience for staying with us and for asking so many good questions. I'm sure you can get a hold of the speakers in the breaks to ask more questions. Yeah. So, yeah, and thanks to our partners again. We will be back now at 2 p.m. So there's an hour of lunch. So enjoy the lunch and see you later.